Right. So welcome, everyone. I'm Adelina Comas-Herrera, the director of the Global Observatory of Long-Term Care, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you today. And this is, we're very excited. It's the first webinar of the interest groups on technology and long-term care. And I'm going to give a very brief introduction of the observatory, which may already be familiar to some of you, but just in case. So the Global Observatory of Long-Term Care is a platform that aims to support cross-national learning to improve and strengthen care systems and is part of the internationally long-term care policy network. And our aim is to identify shared challenges on long-term care, showcase how different countries and localities are addressing them, and share research evidence and facilitate collaborations. And it's open to everyone, policymakers, industry, advocates, care professionals, academics, and so on, although the majority of members are currently academics. The way it works is basically, it's a platform that is powered by people's willingness to share work. So we do this through, we have some of our own publications, including long-term care system profiles for different countries. We publish blogs, so you can let us know, for example, if you have a new publication that you'd like to write a blog about and share. And we also have our own methods guides and interest guides. And if you'd be interested in contributing to any of these, please let us know. We also function mainly through interest groups and like today, and what the interest groups do is to organize webinars and share relevant publications and resources and bring people together who share a similar interest. And we are gradually building a database of already 555 experts on long-term care, which are peer listed by country, topics, and methods, publications on long-term care, research projects, and of course the videos of all the webinars we do. Here you can see our list of forthcoming webinars. So after today, the next one is on care workforce and looking particularly at worker age and the factors that affect their willingness to work in this sector. On the 8th of May, we're looking at the politics of living care migration in Taiwan, Austria, and Germany. 14th of May, we have one on continence care, very important issue, particularly we're going to hear about how nursing homes are addressing it. And then we have one from the quasi-experimental methods group, which is looking at the methodology for estimating the costs of informal care that may be of interest to some of you. So with that, I finish the introduction, and I'm very happy to hand over to Jackie Demant, who's going to introduce the interest group and their next activities.
Yes, hello. So I'm very happy that everyone, very welcome to our technology and long-term care interest group. As Adelina said, it's our first one. So we're very excited to explore with you the issues around access, use, and delivery of long-term care in a world that is changing very rapidly and increasingly digital. Just a very quick note, if any of you have work in this in this area and would like to share your work and your findings, we're very open to having a discussion about perhaps presenting at a future webinar. So please do get in touch. I'll put our email addresses in the chat later on. I just want to very quickly introduce the co-conveners of this interest group, which is myself, Jackie Demant, and I work at the Care Policy and Evaluation Center at the London School of Economics. Also have on our little team is Professor Paul Fredolino, who's a professor of social work at, there you go, big wave, at the Michigan State University. And then we have Dr. Tenzin Wagmo, who is working at the University of Basel in biomedical ethics. So, oh, sorry, senior researcher, sorry, in the University of Basel. And she is bravely taking on the big leap of being our first presenter of this interest group, and she's going to present her work on the ethics of digital technologies in long-term care. So without further ado, Tenzin, we're all looking forward to hearing what your findings on this topic.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for your kind presentation. Thank you to everybody who are joining here today, this afternoon. It is a pleasure for me to be able to present some of my study findings with all of you. So I will go ahead and start with my presentation, and some of you may wonder what I mean by new and old, and I hope to be able to explain the choices of my title eventually in the course of the presentation. So I will talk a bit about what are the smart new technologies in the care of older person that I was interested in as part of my research project. I'll briefly talk about also my research project, which was termed, which has an acronym, the Resource Project. And then we go into the main new and old ethical issues, and followed by a few of the conclusions. Most of the work that I'm presenting today comes from one of my paper that is not yet published. So therefore, all of you will get the recording of this presentation a bit later than normal, and I would still have to wait for the peer reviews to come in, and I do hope I don't have to change too much for the paper to be published. So we all have experienced technological developments in the last few decades based on how old we are. Some of us may have seen much more than others, but in the last decade, we all have gone through more or less the same kind of like the changes. And we all have somehow adapted, right? Those of us who are in academia, we have adapted, we are still adapting to what's coming, and we will have to adapt to the new things that will come, and we probably don't know how we want to do it at the moment. But in the context of aging and caregiving for older persons, I will only bring in one paper. This is a bit older paper. I'm a co-author on this paper as well, where we looked into intelligent assistive technologies. So in the care of older persons, naturally, assistive technologies have been used for a long time. And here we did a study on only looking at intelligent assistive technologies. And then here, what the point I want to make here is, when we did the study, we looked into how many of these technologies were available, what kind of technologies. And for only intelligent assistive technology, from a period of 2000 to 2016, there were 539 such technologies that were available only for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, which also underscores my point that there are many technologies that are being developed, that are being deployed in the care of older persons. And to be on the same terminology basis, or in the same playing field, I would like to kind of define what are intelligent assistive technologies, as well as what are the smart home health technologies that were part of my study. So the intelligent assisted technologies are any systems or devices with their own computing power, which could be used to increase, maintain, and improve functional capabilities of individuals living with cognitive, physical, or communication disabilities. And the smart home health technologies are certain type of smart home technologies. And here we have this certain type because I do exclude in my study all technologies at home that are for purposes like cooking and other things which are not health related. Which would be non-invasive, unobtrusive, interoperable, and possibly also wearable technologies that use the concept of Internet of Things, which means that it has to be more than one IATs that are connected to each other, and the sum of output that they give is more than the output that we will get from individual IATs. And these technologies could thereby remotely monitor the older resident and register any abnormal deviations in their daily habits and vital signs, for example, and at the same time send these alerts, analyze this data, and then come to an analysis that, okay, these data are important to be able to send it to a formal or informal caregivers when it's necessary and appropriate based on kind of like algorithms that are put into who to send, when to send, for example. And then these would be kind of the examples of these technologies. So these could be distributed systems, which would be several sensors in the house, handheld devices and multimedia, different types of software, different applications, wearables in the body, wearables on the body, and wearables on our clothes also, and different types of robots. So, in case anybody has questions, please feel free to ask. Else I'll go on. So do not hesitate to stop me if needed. So I forgot to say it before. And then based on the audience, I wouldn't go through why these technologies would be kind of like necessary, since all the audience are from the field of long-term care and therefore studying mostly older persons. I would assume you all would know why we are talking about technology and why we think or hope that they could be useful. And then going forward to my second point of my research project. So my research project was funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation as part of the call for projects related to digitalization. And my project was at the nexus of technology, gerontology, and caregiving. And there my aim was to study the ethical and social issues related to the acceptance of technology in order for us to be able to facilitate their acceptance. So in some ways, the project was already positively biased, and that was the nature of the call, right? The call was digitalization. So all the projects were geared towards how can we make digitalization possible. And I had a team of PhD students, postdocs, philosophers, experts in nursing and public health, medicine, who were part of my team and who helped me with this project in the last 5 years. And the project included a systematic review of literature. The findings of these of the systematic review have been published already, and there, similar to the empirical part of the project, we mapped the ethical issues that other studies that didn't really whose aim was not what are the ethical issues, but these were empirical studies on the use of these technologies for older adults. We mapped all these studies to know what are the ethical issues that they noted and what were the barriers and benefits of these technologies that they highlighted. And the second part of the project included doing interviews, and for the interviews, we selected these 4 types of technologies. Well, theoretically, there would be only 2 types. So sensors on the body, sensors in the house, and video cameras would be monitoring technology. And then the last one would be the robotic technology. And we selected these 4 as examples to show to our participants to elicit their opinions on these technologies. And our rationales for selecting this range was to have type of technologies that are readily available, available and affordable to some sense, types of technology that are there that are also used but not as much used. And then the robots would be more futuristic. Paro, which is the seal robot here, is available. It's quite expensive. Pepper is the assistive robot. It is also available. It's very expensive and it's less used. And we did interviews in both the German and the Swiss, both in the German-speaking and the French-speaking part of Switzerland. My data that I've used for this paper and for this presentation all come from the German-speaking part, where we carried out 60 interviews with 67 participants. And there were 23 older persons, 27 older persons, 23 professional caregivers, 17 family caregivers, and they came from mix of places. For example, the professional caregivers were working for Spitex. Spitex are nurses who provide care at home, as well as nurses in nursing home and assisted living. Similarly, older participants were also almost half of them were living at home. The other were either living in nursing home or assisted living facility, and the family caregivers were providing care for the older person or older parents. With some had older parents had dementia, some didn't. So we had a nice mix of different care situations in the sample. And from the qualitative studies, several other papers have been published related to technology acceptance. One paper just on privacy, another paper looking into how much of these monitoring technologies fulfill different phases of care ethics. A paper on virtual reality. VR wasn't, I'm not presenting data on VR because VR is not a health technology. It is more of an entertainment technology. And this was a question that one of the students who was working on the project was interested in this technology, and she added some questions, and therefore this data was analyzed separately. And then a paper on the robot Paro is already published, and this data. We also have data on survey responses from the general adult population in Switzerland. This data is currently being analyzed, and however, there are not a lot of ethics relevant information that we captured in the survey part of the study. And now I move to more or less the core of our talk today on the new and old ethical issues. So here, by old, I mean the ethical issues that are recurring, that are the go-to ethical issues. These are the ethical issues that all of you would have expected to hear from me, all of you would raise if we were talking or discussing any issues related to use of technology in different settings. And by old, I do not mean that these problems are solved, right? And I do not mean that they are not important. They are important, they are valid. However, I gave the title old in a way to highlight some of the kind of positive bias and our positive bias towards certain ethical issues. So there are 5 that I would say are quote unquote old, and these are respecting autonomy, dignity of the person, deception, privacy, and benefits of technology. And I include the benefits of technology in the ethics part also because because obviously beneficence is one of the 4 main principles of biomedical ethics. And if you don't talk about benefits of technology, we end up talking about ethics as more in a negative term or kind of issues that hinder acceptance, and that would be also a biased way of presenting. And the new or the emerging ethical issues would be the humanness of care or the fear of replacement of human care, issues related to stigma and othering that came up a few times for 1 or 2 specific technology. And one of the quote-unquote newest would be the issue of reducing responsibility and becoming more dependent. And these technologies these ethical concerns by participant groups are mapped in this way, and this mapping shows kind of more details than the 8 that I presented before, and I will go through them one at a time. So, by arrows, you see the arrows are pointing towards respecting choices, user control, and these respecting choices, user control, you see that it comes for all these 3 technologies by all these 3 participant groups. And this relates to the idea of respecting autonomy of the end user, which is a positive thing. Because at least in the Swiss data, all the different participant groups for all the different technologies, everybody was more or less agreeing that we have to ensure that there is consent. The older user knows what is being used, has agreed to it, and we cannot use a technology against their wishes. So that has to be very clear, which also means that if an older person refuses to use the technology, they also take the risk of what happens thereafter. And then the other issue related to autonomy is the user control. So once an older person decides to use a technology, it doesn't mean that he or she has to use it all the time. They can still decide to use it when they want, how they want, and where they want. And that is very important because they may not want to they may not feel comfortable when there are sensors and video cameras monitoring them when there are friends over for visitations, for example. And they may not want a technology in certain spaces of their house. And with respect to the robots, the idea of user control came in a way that I want to make sure that the robot would not harm me, right? I do not know what it can or cannot do, so therefore I must have the control to be able to kind of make sure that I'm not harmed by the robot. And then the second issue is the dignity of the end user, and that only came up with the use of the robot Paro. And here the idea was Paro as an animal-like robot was seen as a toy, right? It is a toy. Toys are used by children, and therefore toys should not be used on adults. If you use toys on adults, it is infantilization, and that is not acceptable. However, this entire discourse went on with the idea that, however, Paro is very cute also, and it seems that it would be beneficial as well. So therefore, in this case, for me as a competent older person, you still can't use it on me, irrespective of how beneficial it may be, but you can use it on them, right? So it's the other group that you can use it for, and this them was usually older adults who are alone in nursing homes, older adults who have dementia, living in long-term care. So for this group, you can use it. And whereas for me as a competent person, you cannot use it. And there the arguments often related to me as a competent person who has dignity, you cannot do it on me. And then the third ethical issue is related to deception. And the deception issue only came up with the assistive robots. And here it came out more concretely when we are doing the interviews, when we asked, how would you feel when we fed Pepper with information about your family, a voice of your family or friend? And there it came out more clearly that now it would be not acceptable at all. It is not, my child is my child, so you cannot do that, and that would be creepy, it's worrisome. And then if somebody has dementia, it's lying to them. What do I do if the person asks, is it a real animal or is it a real human? Do I tell that, or maybe if they're forming a relationship with these robots, do we tell them that it is not a real person, it is not a real animal, these are toys or robots? So these issues are coming more with these social robots. And the fourth was related to surveillance and data concerns, which concerns the important issue of privacy. And it only came up with the monitoring technologies, the wearables and the sensors with or without camera at home. And here the idea was, in Switzerland, we live in a society that we don't surveil people. So it is not acceptable to do it. Under certain condition, maybe we can agree to it. So therefore, under certain condition, under certain spaces, it can be done, maybe more acceptable, but not all the time and not everywhere. And also with the data, who gets my data, which type of data would be sent was important. So in a way that the privacy issue was tightly related to the issue of autonomy and control of their own data. And here, for example, a participant says, so I'm in camera, let's say at the entrance, I would also think it's something good, but camera on every corner, I don't know if you'll be a little worried, so. And the fifth ethical issue is ensuring safety and health. which fits into the benefit for the older person and caregivers. And here, these monitoring technologies can give you certain data that allows you to do health management, and that also allows you, in case of a fall, it would automatically call the person in need. So therefore, it ensures safety, which reduces caregiving stress, and also it results in optimization of care resources. So if a caregiver knows that the older person or older resident is okay, there is no need to go and check on person A, whereas the caregiver can go and check on person B. So it optimizes care resources, which was deemed as important in light of not having enough care workers. And now we go to the new ethical issues, which would be the first of stigma. And interestingly, stigma didn't come that often. And it came for the robot Paro, as I alluded to before, and for the wearables. And here the idea was using certain technology could be kind of like a warning sign that, oh, I am in need of technology, and therefore people will associate me as an older person who is no longer independent. And therefore that was the worry that came. So it was the association worry. And then the other one was the humanness of care. And this obviously only comes with the Robert Pepper, or came more strongly with Robert Pepper. And here it was the notion that the human care or the nursing care, either at home or in the long-term care setting, it's very human-based. All our care is provided by a nurse or a nurse aide, and these are real human beings who have been taking care of us and who are taking care of us, and therefore this is what we are used to and this is what we want. And this type of technology is not natural. It's a machine. It's cold. It doesn't have the human warmth, and it would not be able to hold social interactions like we can hold with another human being. However, within all these, the worries related to this replacement of human care also came with the understanding that we have to reduce caregiving stress. We have to optimize care because there's not a lot of choices. And what the participant often talked about was how to optimize this care in a way that there would be certain tasks that the robots can do. And most of the time, these tasks were what we coded as servant or service-like tasks. So bringing food, picking something from the floor, keeping something. So very low-key tasks where they would be okay with no kind of like human-like interactions. And then the last ethical concern that I wanted to raise in this presentation was the increasing dependence on these technology. So first is the idea of data dependence. So once we have all these technologies collecting so much data, it tells you what you are supposed to do. It tells you how you are supposed to feel. At the same time, this data goes to the care providers, which also means that the care providers assesses how you ought to be feeling now, right? So in that way, your needs and your subjective needs may not be addressed. At the same time, if you are giving information that doesn't fit the quote unquote objective values that these technologies brings forth, you may not feel trusted or heard. So that was seen as a problem. And related to what I said before with the use of Pepper, several older persons said with aging, there are very limited things that I can do. So if I if I now give away although robots can do certain things, and there it may be I would still accept them to accept if they do certain things and not the better quote unquote human things. However, if these smaller things they take away, there's nothing really left for me to do. So not only I become mentally, I don't have to use too much brain power because all this information are given to me. Now I may not even have to use my physical body to even make my tea or anything because a robot would do it. So I become more dependent on technology, which also means that I become less responsible. There is a risk that I become less responsible for myself. So from these results, we mapped these findings now by technology and the ethical deliberation. So in the paper, I combined them to see what are the ethical blind spots. So the first one is the issue of privacy, which came very heavily on the monitoring technologies, but it was not mentioned at all for the robotic technologies. And here, the understanding is that the robot does things but does not collect data, which necessarily is not true. A robot which in the future, which may come into the market, would be collecting a lot of data, on both visual data and other data related to sensors. So a robot might be more harmful to our privacy than we actually think at the moment. And the second one was the stigma associated with the wearables. And this was this is an understandable stigma at the moment because most of the participants associated wearables with the Red Cross buttons, like the emergency buttons. So and there was that association with a watch, with kind of watch-like thing that was available in Switzerland for emergency alerts, and they associated wearables with that, which also means that this type of stigma would no longer be there in the next 5 to 10 years. So with another generation of older persons using wearables for other purposes than just emergency alerts, this type of stigma would go away. And the third one was deception. So deception was associated also with the robots, but not with the monitoring technologies, which at the moment, yeah, does make sense. But eventually, when these technologies become more advanced, these monitoring technologies are at the moment only monitoring. After a while, they would start speaking also. So therefore, there would be other relationships, other sort of deceptions, like more emotional deceptions was not accounted for in the data. And most of the deception idea was the physical body deception. What I here wanted to highlight is the competing ethical issues. So because there are ethical concerns doesn't mean that we wouldn't use technology, right? Because there are ethical concerns, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't do certain things. So most of us have to balance different either practical concerns or different practical concerns with ethical concerns or different ethical concerns between each other. So here I wanted to give an example of these concerns: the optimization of care, reducing care burden, and the replacement of human care. These would be concerns that act against each other. So if they, with the idea that we have to optimize care, we want to reduce caregiving burden, it also means that we have to accept some sort of replacement of human care. Right, so they all don't go in the same direction, and they would collide with each other. And other issues that I didn't present before would be, for example, with the robots, there were a few accounts that robots could be useful to reduce loneliness, but at the same time, there is risk that an older person's in a long-term care might self-isolate with robots, may form attachment with it, and then self-isolate. So we we do not know how to address all these issues, I guess, properly or unanimously for everyone. So with this, I move on to my final remarks. So there is bias in ethically relevant values attached to specific technology. So here I don't mean bias in a bad way. I mean bias in a way that there are certain ethical issues that we think about all the time, and there may be others that we ought to be thinking about that we do not we are not yet there. And then ethical values attached to technologies will not be the same, right? For each technology is not going to be the same. And for ethical values that we attach to technologies now would change in the future because technology is changing and because hopefully some of the issues we would have solved, right? And, my hope is we would have solved issues related to privacy and issues related to autonomy. And then we are able to go into the other issues that we haven't tackled yet. And then with increasing use of AI, there would be other issues that we don't really know. And at the same time, with AI becoming smarter, or with generative AI, we wouldn't even know what would be the ethical issues at the moment. And then we do need this benefit and harm balancing for each caregiver and carer unit, deciding how to use these technology. And in a final way, I want to say that the ethical values will obviously differ in context and culture. Those that I have presented obviously come from the global north, from Switzerland, a very rich country in Europe. And then the ethical concerns of the global north would be different from the global south, and there would be between differences also within a country as well. So obviously my findings should not be is not generalizable. So with this, I am happy to take questions. I thank you all.
Thank you.
Jennifer, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, Tenzin. That was really, really interesting. Thanks very much for sharing that with us. So I had two questions. One was, and I may have missed it, so apologies if I didn't understand it or I missed it, but did you say something or did you find something about the ethical implications for care staff or informal carers? So what you were concentrating on was sort of the ethical implications for the person receiving care, and I understand that, but presumably there are things around being seen as not particularly skillful or deprofessionalization or all those things. Did you find anything like that, or is that another piece of work?
In the qualitative data, I did not find it. It was more on the reducing caregiving burden, optimization of care. But in the systematic review, we found this issue of changing responsibilities. So I, as a caregiver, my responsibility towards the older person changes because when we use technology, I'm not caring for the older person, I'm caring for the technology, because now I have to figure out how to be a person who can use the technology and care for the technology, and this is not what I'm trained for.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting way of looking at it, isn't it? It's a sort of changing role, but it's also about what you feel in yourself is your professional status, isn't it?
Exactly.
So I had another question, which was completely different, which is that if you were going to advise here in the UK an NHS trust which wanted to invest a significant proportion of their money, public funds, on this type of technology, what would you advise them?
Would you like me to answer with related to what type of technology I would recommend?
Well, you can answer in whatever way you like. So what we know is that lots of NHS trusts are thinking about investing more of their percentage of their money into such technology. And I'm not sure how much time is spent thinking of the ethical implications. So if I were going to come to you and say, what would you advise? What would you advise?
I guess for the robotic technologies, it is clear that they are not there yet, right? So using it would be economically more or less waste for the NHS, and they would need to spend more money into robotics and robotic technologies to know which type of care can be replaced and which cannot be replaced, which results in an overall net positive and not net negative. And for the monitoring technologies, if we are able to solve all the ethical concerns, they seem to be cheap ways of getting some things done, right? These are technologies that we have, and obviously there would be many older people who would not want to be surveyed in their room. They may refuse to use wearables. They may not want to use iPads. So these would be all barriers that have to be tackled. But these seem to be technologies where there's enough evidence that they can have quite substantial benefit if used in the right way. But obviously, if we have a nursing home that has cameras all over and one nurse who's just deciding where to go, that's not the kind of long-term care that we want, right? So there has to be some sort of figuring out which technology would be used, how much, and kind of testing in a way that we don't go on reinventing the wheel again and again. We figure out what is the right solution.
Okay, I think the advice is think carefully, isn't it? Which is very sensible advice. Thanks very much, Tenzin.
You're welcome. Sarah, and then Duke.
Thank you very much. That was a really fascinating account of your research. I was just reflecting on the extent to which the new ethical issues are qualitatively different from the old, and whether they're different in kind or whether it is just a sort of difference in context or degree. Because I suppose thinking of your first one, the humanness of care, even with real live carers, we have a lot of issues today about the bureaucratization of care, the tick box care, the 5-minute care, the inhumane care of human beings. So that is an issue with human care. The stigma, again, to some extent, people who have a carer who goes out and about with them and supports them might also feel stigmatized that that they have to have such a carer. And similarly, with the reduction in self-responsibility, perhaps that is quite pertinent to having the robot bringing you your tea and you can have as many cups as you like. But equally, I suppose if you do have a full-time carer with you in your own home, then again, you might become more dependent, and that links to the autonomy. So it was just that idea of, what counts as a new ethical issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is a wonderful question, and it's more of a terminology that I use for this presentation that I thought was quite kind of like a funny mind game for myself. And I was also thinking whether this new is actually new. And in this context, I was thinking, when the Industrial Revolution happened and other technologies that came into our space, there were loss of human activity, human work, right? However, there we didn't really think of loss of humanness. So there, I was trying to figure out why I used this. I didn't really have. I don't really have a very good answer for you, other than me just happily choosing terminology because I wanted to have a nice title. And then to your other points related to there being stigma with being a caregiver or having a caregiver, and that's true, right? We do have there would be stigma associated with being dependent. At the same time, there is stigma being a caregiver to an older person. Not many people in the care profession want to work as geriatric nurses. They do not want to work as geriatrician. So we do have this stigma associated there with this type of care. So that's evident. So I take your point.
Thank you for your research, and this discussion generally is very timely. I think my reflections are one, in terms of health and social care, and from a social work practice perspective. I'm a qualified social worker for over 20 years, and working within the UK for most of that time. We work on the basis of consent in adult services and in health as well. So consent is that principle.
Yeah.
And to operationalize consent, you either get consent or you don't get consent. And as people deteriorate in their mental capacity, then there is a legal process that by law we have to follow. And that's enshrined in the Mental Capacity Act. So we have to go through what's known as a mental capacity assessment. So it may be worth looking into that and how it's been operationalized, how these decisions at that individual level on a case-by-case basis is operationalized. And for those that do not have the ability to consent and fail the capacity assessment, there is a best interest decision process that needs to be followed. And that is again interesting to see, how well it has been followed, despite the fact that it's been enacted in law since 2007. So it's a 2005 Act, but enacted in 2007. And that is for all providers, all people looking after people who they think may need, due to a disturbance of mind, may need support. So you may want to look at that. And of course, I think increasingly I'm concerned really that AI and new technology is raising the bar in terms of, these types of discussions and the complexities around this, because it's so pervasive. It's not just about individual consent, but also the whole question, as you refer to, is it ethical to even consider providing care from a robot? Is that technically care, or is that something else? Is that, so these are really important questions that I think goes beyond just those kinds of traditional forms of thinking around ethics. So yeah, so just thanks for raising it. But already there are some tools that might be useful in terms of analyzing how it fits into your research.
Yes, thank you so much for the comment, and I take them. And I guess with regard to the very important issue of whether we should use robots, right? Whether using robots is even a care would be a very interesting analysis. In one of the paper, we tried to do the same with the monitoring technology, looking into the care ethics cycle. So what is required of in care? So identifying care, taking responsibility to provide care, and then caregiving, and then the response of the care receiver. And in this way, we were monitoring technologies theoretically can only do two if it works in a perfect world, right? Identifying care, so the older person is falling or fell, and then responding to the care. Therefore, I need to call the family or call the hospital, but then it can never actually do the care work, right? And then in the end, we do not know how the care receiver would now respond. Would he or she respond positively, or negatively to complete this this circle. And with robots, I wouldn't. If I'm not sure how people would actually respond. Would I still be happy if the robot was able to provide me care or not? And this is such a new technology that I think personally I haven't been able to grip myself with it. But I do think robotics is the kind of next technology where obviously there's a lot of money going in, and that could be seen as the next technology that might save, that may be the answer to providing care for a growing number of older persons. But I really don't know. I'm not sure. I'm very ambivalent about it.
Yeah, sorry, can I just add to our discussion before we proceed? So the question is, right, do we view care as purely functional, as a functional transaction, or is there more in care than we thought? And that's the argument, really, because we keep on talking about recruiting carers with empathy, with certain qualities. I can't see how those qualities would be replicated simply in robotics.
Yeah.
So that's just to hone on that fact that actually care is more than just a transaction, I believe, but that's my view anyway. So as a society, we need to make that decision as well. So that's a higher level kind of ethical consideration beyond that human decision making process. Okay, so that's it really.
Thank you. Jennifer and then Anna.
Yeah, so I just put something in the chat actually, which pertains to that. So I'll just mention it, which is that at the Centre of Empathic Healthcare in Leicester University in England, they're doing some work on whether robots can demonstrate and deliver empathy in medical consultations. And I'm actually doing a debate on this subject a bit later in the year, actually. So I'd completely disagree with the last person who commented, and I think robots can deliver and demonstrate empathy. But that goes, you're a philosopher, aren't you, Tenzin? So that the tendency to go into sort of realms of personhood becomes very tempting here. So, I mean, that would be the philosophical sort of extension of that argument. But anyway, I wasn't going to say on that. What I was going to say was coming back to what Sarah asked about new and old ethics, it occurs to me that you don't need a great big list of suggestions of what to look at next. But if you were looking at something, maybe what you want to look at is what constitutes new and old technology rather than new and old ethics. Because when I heard your presentation, I'm thinking about the X-ray. And then I'm thinking about, exactly, and then I'm thinking about things like laparoscopic surgery. And then I'm thinking about machines that read X-rays. So, it sounds as if we're making some sort of distinction between robots or something new and scary and, all the rest of it, where we haven't had this. And I'm glad you, came back, or somebody mentioned the Industrial Revolution, because, these aren't new questions, are they? But it might be nice to try and tease out what's special, because people get worried, don't they, about things that are new. But we've always been worried about things that are new. This is just another thing that we're worried about because it's new. And maybe that's the real question. Why are we worried about things that are new?
True. Yes, Anna?
Yes, thank you. I'll try to be short because it's almost 5, at least in our time zone. So actually, I was thinking, listening, there was a lot of talk of autonomy that you've been mentioning. So, and also the question that you were asked about NHS, and you were talking about advice on monitoring technology, that we would have to tackle the barriers. My question is, and then there was a comment about consent, and informed consent and all that. And what I see with technology nowadays often is that, especially when it's in the system, sometimes is it really autonomy and free will there anymore? Because it's, if a whole home for elderly or whole NHS has a system of monitoring, for certain monitoring, and you will not be entitled to a service anymore, or you cannot go to the home for elderly anymore. Is that really autonomy and consent there anymore? So my question is actually, when you were doing this research, that I really look forward to the article that you'll be publishing, did you find any good practices about how this issue was sometimes tackled, or some good examples or ideas on the subject, how to go about that system changing? And it was always changing, as it was mentioned just now at the end, but monitoring all the time, it's not something that was always there. We have it in dictatorial systems, you have surveillance, but not to that degree that's possible now with the technology. So there are still, I think, some differences between X-rays. I'm a medical doctor by profession, and being surveyed as a dementia patient with dementia all the time. So here I would like to hear you have some good examples of how do we tackle that in the future, because that's one of my fields of interest also.
In the study, from the data, if I remember, there were a very few participants who said, if a nursing home is using it, they have to be very clear about it, and I have to know about it, and then I decide whether I go in or not, right? But then this comes from a very high income country. You know, high income people are maybe financially well off to have the privilege to say, oh, I don't go to nursing home X and I go to nursing home Y. And not all of us would be privileged in that way in every context, right? So in that way, the ethics, I've seen studies and a few papers, but it's not said in those papers as the key point, but kind of alluded. At some point, we will go towards the normalization of technology. And that is what you are saying. All this would be part of the system, and there's not a lot that we can do, right? There's not a lot, only those, and this is something that I've been raising in a few of my presentations, and now it comes with your question, is the idea that, in my opinion, if we come to a world like that, where it becomes part of the setting, that all of these technologies are there, only a few would have the privilege to not go along with it, right? And there I would think is the privilege of rejection. And at the moment, we think there are people who reject because they are ideologically in a different wavelength. In my opinion, with technology, only the people who will reject in the future, because technology is likely to be very normalized, right? With the healthcare system, with the demography that we have, it is likely to be normalized. And once it's normalized, there's only those who can reject are the very few who are the haves, right? And in Switzerland, an example, I don't know if that happened in UK, because of digitalization. Well, obviously it would be also the case in other countries. A lot of shopping becomes automatic, right? We check in and check out on our own in kind of like grocery stores. In banks also, we do everything online banking. And in Switzerland, a few years ago, we paid all our bill using kind of like a ticket that we get, and you go to the post office and you pay bills. And that was removed all of a sudden. And only those who still wanted to use it have to pay a fee to be able to use that ticket to pay the bills. Or you have to move to electronic banking. And it's more a normalization of electronic banking that happened, and which obviously affects, in this case, the have-nots, those who are not used to e-banking, and those who are very old and do not know how to do it. Those are the ones who are kind of left behind. And that would be, in my opinion, a scenario that is likely to happen. Obviously, I can't forecast, but often during my research, that was one thing that always bothered me, that how we quickly changed into e-ticketing, e-banking, and everything at a national level, that really left many older people behind, and those who do not have these technology access behind. Right? So I'm not sure if I think I may have answered your question in the opposite way.
Oh, thank you. It's a great answer, but my or train of thought, but just my question would be maybe for all of us at one point, what can we do? Because this is real ethical issue of inequality at one point. And I still think, because then we give all these examples that are also true that you now listed, but it's still different when it comes to surveillance and monitoring than when it comes to electronic banking. I think there is a distinction between something. So my question is, in this digital, more and more digital world, how can we find a balance? So this huge inequality of having still a privacy, a life of your own, we can still keep it in the society that's changing, and being also very pragmatical care stuff is less and less, and other issues. But it's yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, so
I think, sorry.
I wouldn't have the answer to this, right? This is more of a
I
political.
think we need to, sorry to jump in, but
exactly.
I think we're going to have to come to some of this in our next webinar, as I think there's obviously a lot here, and all the discussion of also all the inequalities. And I do wonder whether, I'm just looking now at Jackie, Tenzin, and Paul, whether there might be some theme here coming for your next webinar. And those of you who took part, you can either email us back or contact directly the speakers. And I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar of this interest group and the future GOLTC webinars. Thank you very much, and sorry to cut the discussion short, but we're already over time. It's been fascinating. Thank you all.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.